What's up, True Crime World? You're here with Luminal on the Wall. I'm Bevy.
And I'm Becky. Today's case is about a young girl who goes missing after given a little bit of independence from her parents, speaking to every parent's worst nightmare when it comes to their children. This is a case of Vicki Hoskinson. Listener's discretion is advised.
Hey guys, just a public service announcement for all of our listeners before we really get into it. If you don't feel like listening to a 5-minute intro, I would suggest skipping ahead.
Hello to our LOTW friends out there.
Hey.
And hey, Bev.
Hey, Beck.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
I know. I was so excited all day. I was like, woo, podcasting day.
With my sister.
Yeah, I was excited to see you.
Oh, good. And get fed.
And get fed. You always feed me when I come over because I come straight from work.
That's right. Don't want no hangry girl on my case.
Yeah. I have a mad case of hangriness.
Yeah, she does. But we avoid that. And all goes well.
Feeding me dinner. Yeah.
That's right.
It's all good. But I was excited about this case specifically because you chose the case.
The case. The one case that made Becky and Bevy who we are today. Well, not who we are, but our intrigue into true crime.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely did. We watched this case, I think, when we were really young.
Yeah.
I think it was like our intro into true crime.
100% it was.
And we were potentially too young to be watching a murder mystery. However, I think like Mom had left it on in the background and we just kind of were like, whoa.
We gravitated to it.
Yeah. Well, how can you not? It's about a young child who goes missing one day while riding her bike. Like, what is scarier than that?
Yeah, it's literally what kids do. They ride their bike. It's a normal everyday occurrence.
How many times did we leave our home to go bike riding in the community? Like all the time. So it was something that kind of like
hit close to home for us.
Yeah, because
young kids.
It was just like, oh, it could happen to us. Like, you're so innocent as a child. You don't think like leaving your home is going to pose any inherent danger or threat to you. So to hear that like it is possible for us to get hurt just leaving home, I think was like a huge moment for us and like really made us fearful
of the world.
Of the world. Yeah.
The world. Yeah.
So I'm excited to get into it because, well, I hate when I say like I'm excited to talk about someone's death. I'm not excited to talk about someone's death per se, but you know, I'm excited to like.
We're curious about the case, the details, talk about it as adults.
Like, can I just stop putting my foot in my mouth? Like,
I don't think you can.
I don't think I can. It's just like part of my
shut
personality.
Up, Bev. Shut the fuck up.
No,
part of your personality. Hi, I'm Bevy. I stick my foot in my mouth all the time.
Yeah.
And not literally.
Yeah. It's just a habit, a bad, weird habit. It's just awkward. Like right now, just like stop talking. Just stop.
If I just sit here and stare at you, it's going to keep going.
It gets worse. I have verbal diarrhea, Becky. I get all awkward and like you're staring at me with those eyes like, are you going to keep talking? Or are you, oh, you are. That's always what your face is. Oh. The eyebrows are like, oh, stop.
It won't
but you're too kind to like tell me like it's enough. You're like, if you ever hear Becky go, yeah, that's like the moment that you know I've overtalked, I've overshared, and I need to shut the fuck up.
And truly, I have no idea what to say after.
That's how you just say,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another one too.
Oh, yeah, that's it right there. Whew, yeah. I'm getting a little bit nervous and anxious right now, Becky.
I'm so sorry to start off this way. Well, let's cut you off and let's get into the actual case.
You know what's funny about that? I have to say, before you make me seem like I'm the only one with my foot in my mouth, Rebecca, I have to freaking just like bring you down a goddamn notch because we just deleted our first take because you put your foot in your mouth.
I just forgot a word.
Whatever.
And I stumbled.
Yeah. Plenty. Like, this is how it always is. We delete your fuck ups and we keep mine. No. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. You told everyone I cried the other day. So you just stopped that right there.
Payback's a bitch.
As I said before, let's get into it before this goes downhill even further, Beverly.
Okay.
All right. So today's case takes place in the bustling town of Flowing Wells, Arizona. It was a quaint little town just north of Tucson, Arizona. And on Monday, September 17th, 1984, it appeared to be like any other day. 8-year-old Vicki had returned home from school around 3 p.m. And when she got home, she wanted to help her mom make a birthday card for her aunt. When they finished making the card, Vicki asked her mom if she could take it to the mailbox by herself. Now, typically, Debbie would have Vicki use the buddy system with her older sister, Stephanie, and they would go together to ensure each other's safety. However, Stephanie was actually still at school at a track practice, so she was unavailable. But on this day, Debbie decided to let Vicki go alone. She knew that this bike ride would only take about 10 minutes and that Vicki should be home by 3:30. Vicki was absolutely excited to go on this journey. She was grinning from ear to ear and rode off with such independence. About 20 minutes later, Debbie hears the door open. She thinks it's Vicki. She felt a sense of relief, but to her surprise, it was actually her older daughter, Stephanie. She told her mom she was home early because the track practice had been canceled. Now, at this point, Debbie starts feeling a little bit concerned about Vicki because she wasn't back yet. She asked Stephanie, please go to the mailbox, look for your sister. And at that point, she just assumed that Vicki had gotten distracted. Maybe she ran into a friend or saw something that intrigued her.
Taking a little longer getting back to the house.
Yeah, you know kids, like they're given an inch and they take a mile sometimes, right?
Absolutely, especially with like their first bout of independence. They're like, whoa!
Just pure excitement.
Yeah, of course.
Well, unfortunately, when Stephanie went looking for her sister Bev, she couldn't find her. But as she kept looking, she actually stumbled across her sister's bike in the middle of the road. She felt really worried and called out for her sister with absolutely no response. Stephanie quickly turned around and went home to tell her mom what she saw. Debbie knew immediately that something was wrong. Vicki absolutely loved her bike. It was one of her most prized possessions, and she would have never left it anywhere, especially alone on the street. So Debbie then took Stephanie to look for Vicki. They went to where she had seen her sister's bike, and while Debbie loaded up the bike into her car, Stephanie went and knocked on the doors of nearby houses to see if anyone had seen or heard anything. You know, maybe her sister got hurt and they were just, putting a bandage on a cut or something.
Yeah, of course.
But after talking to a couple of the residents, there was no more information. Debbie was really worried and knew she had to call the sheriff to help. She also called her husband to come home quickly. At this point, Vicki had been gone for only about 20 minutes, so this was a really short time frame. Now, even though it was a short time frame, because of the circumstances, everyone knew something was wrong, and they took it very seriously. When the sheriff deputies got there, Debbie gave them photos of Vicki so that they would be able to show people and see if anyone had seen her.
Yeah, canvass the area in a broader sense.
Exactly. So they started out by retracing Vicki's route to the mailbox and home. The mailbox was right in front of a convenience store on a busy road. Deputies asked the manager of this convenience store if he recognized Vicki. He said he did, but he didn't see her that day. So then they were wondering, had she even made it to the mailbox? But they ended up stopping by Vicki's best friend's house, Jennifer Spencer, to see if they had seen her, if she had maybe stopped by to play or anything like that. However, Mrs. Spencer said that she had not seen Vicki that afternoon. But while deputies were speaking with Mrs. Spencer, her 5-year-old son said he had seen Vicki. She was riding her bike and had stopped to ask him if Jennifer was home, but he told her she wasn't and she headed in the direction of her home. So they knew that Vicki had already dropped off the card,
yeah. And so she was on her way home when she
was close to home.
That it always makes me so sad when there's like just a moment where things could have been so different. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like if her friend was home, the outcome would have been so different.
Yes, for sure. I know it's hard to think back in time and be like, dang, if only that had happened.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
Now, just as the little boy was finishing up talking to the deputies, 2 older boys actually approached the deputies, and they had also seen Vicki riding away from the convenience store, so heading home. But just a couple minutes before they rode past Vicki, they noticed a small black car with California plates driving awkwardly through the neighborhoods. What made it so awkward and weird was that the car was driving so slow that they easily passed it on their bikes.
Oh, my stomach just drops hearing that,
I know,
Becky.
Yeah.
I have had personal experiences of like seeing a vehicle that is suspicious driving slow and have that car approach me. And I've had some scary instances with that, like 2 that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yes, you
and
have.
so just hearing that this car was driving so slow, it's like someone's looking for
something
or
someone.
someone, but mostly you'd think someone.
Yeah.
Right? It's just so creepy. I hate hearing that.
I know you do.
My stomach makes me feel sick when I hear that.
Well, you're not the only one that has that feeling, right? These boys obviously felt creeped out enough that they needed to tell the deputies. Unfortunately, that was the extent of the information the boys had, because once they passed the vehicle and passed Vicki, they just kind of went on with their merry way. They also weren't able to get a good look at the driver, so they had no description to help with.
However, that being said, they do have some information for the cops, like being able to say that it was a California license plate.
Yeah.
And just now the cops know there was a suspicious looking vehicle. They at least have a direction to kind of look into.
Exactly.
Like something to look into.
Yeah, they have, if anyone else mentions something, they're like, oh, let's look into that. It might take them one step further, stuff like that.
Exactly.
So hearing this, though, the officers were very concerned about this black car. And they got a pretty strong feeling that Vicki was abducted. They were really fearful that this could turn into a murder investigation. They did not want a single thing to be missed or overlooked, so they actually decided to call in a homicide unit to help.
I'm guessing that homicide units have just more resources at their disposal. I think it's a safe assumption, at least, because why else would you call in a homicide unit if they didn't have something to offer?
Oh, for sure. And I think also they might be looking for other things that other departments might not be.
Right.
Or pick up on things, stuff like that. But either way, all hands were on deck, and they actually set up a headquarters station at a local elementary school. Now, news spread really quickly about Vicki's disappearance in the area. Fortunately, because of this, there was a flurry of volunteers that came forward that wanted to help. They helped man the tip lines, and they assisted with the searches. They went from the original spot where Vicki's bike was found, and then in kind of a circular pattern started expanding, combing through grass, parks, playgrounds, everywhere they possibly could to see if they could find one shred of evidence or anything that would help in this investigation. Detectives even brought out search dogs to see if they could track her scent. But unfortunately, Bev, they found nothing.
Devastating, I know. And you would have to think it makes sense that they found nothing if you're assuming that their theory of abduction was actually a thing, and if they thought this car picked her up and took her away. I mean, the scent would drop off pretty quick.
That it would.
And no further evidence would be had unless a crime was committed in that vicinity. So it's unfortunate. I'm glad they went through the steps, but it does make sense that nothing was found.
No, for sure it does. Now, as these minutes are turning into hours, detectives are getting worried that Vicki may have been taken out of state.
Yeah.
And under the kidnapping statute, the FBI was called to help because they have way more access across state lines. Now, over the first couple days, so many calls came in, and the hard part about that is having to filter through all the calls. There are prank calls, ill-informed people, calls that completely lead to dead ends.
Yeah.
But finally, they get one call that seems a tad bit more legitimate. A woman calls in saying she thought she had seen Vicki at the mall the previous evening. The caller was actually one of the store clerks at the toy store there. She had noticed a woman with long hair and a really wide-rimmed hat come in with a young girl who was really upset and looked like Vicki. The clerk told investigators the woman was buying the little girl a toy, and it seemed like she was trying to appease the young girl with this toy. She also noticed the woman had been carrying another shopping bag from another store in the mall. Then the woman ended up paying with cash from an envelope, and the pair was on their way. As they walked out of the store, the clerk overheard them arguing over what to have for dinner. Because of this interaction, the clerk went to the police department to help to create a composite drawing of this woman. They were all very suspicious of it. Based on the behavior the clerk noticed and how the woman was treating the girl, investigators felt maybe this woman had lost a child before and was trying to replace it.
With Vicki.
Exactly. Now, This was just a theory. They had no evidence, but the lady was being pretty kind and trying to make the girl happy, and that's why they thought that. And although this was something they were going to look into and continue to investigate, Debbie and the FBI felt that this was odd. They found it hard to believe that Vicki would have not even tried to alert anyone or tried to get away if she was taken into a public space. Now, when they canvassed the mall with the sketch, another clerk actually recognized the woman and the girl. But when they canvassed Vicki's neighborhood with the same composite, no one recognized the woman. But they took that same drawing to a high school to see if anyone who was leaving school recognized the drawing. And a young man actually said, "Hey, I recognize that woman." He had seen this woman with a young girl in a black Monte Carlo the previous afternoon.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he said the little girl was looking out the window, and investigators start to wonder, could this be the same car those two boys on the bikes had seen? They start investigating the Monte Carlo, the black Monte Carlo, but there was so many of them at the time, they got no hits on that lead. It just kind of stopped, and then they had to try and move forward. Now, down at headquarters, a woman actually brought her 3-year-old son in. They lived on the opposite side of the street from where Vicki's bike was found. The mother and son had been outside playing, and the mom had gone inside for just a brief second. And when she came back out, there was Vicki's bike. Her young son was able to tell her that he saw a girl get knocked down off her bike by a black sports car, and a big girl with long hair got out of the car and helped the little girl into the car. Then they drove off. Now, unfortunately, Bev, this all happened when the boy's mother was inside. So the investigators only have the 3-year-old's version to go off of.
It's crazy to think that this 3-year-old could have quite literally seen Vicki's abduction happen in front of him. And it's even more weird that there's all these random tidbits of information coming in about this, and somehow they all kind of seem to paint a similar picture, but really all lack any concrete evidence for the police to go off of.
Well, exactly right. And this is why it's so frustrating for them, is because time is of the essence, and they really need some evidence to send them in a direction if they have any remote possibility that Vicki could be saved, you know? So because of that, Bev, the agents actually go back to where Vicki's bike was found to see if there's anything that was missed, you know, do a double take. And they actually find a mailbox with a post that had a fresh gouge in it that is about 16 to 18 inches above the ground. This would be a correct height for a smaller car. Could this gouge be from the same car that hit Vicki? Could it have happened while hitting Vicki? But the problem with this is it kind of adds to the same way that the investigation is going, that there is no concrete evidence. There's nothing on there that would support exactly what car it is or when it even happened. So they're back to square one. At this point, the detectives are trying to think outside of the box. So they ask other officers and detectives in the area if they have gotten any other reports of a black vehicle from out of state One detective actually remembered he had an earlier encounter that day where he took a statement from a man named Sam Hall. He was an elementary school coach, and he told the officer around 3 p.m. on September 17th, so the same day Vicki went missing, that he noticed a suspicious black car with a California plate driving past the elementary school.
That's a huge piece of information.
Exactly. And
solely because it matches the two boys' accounts of seeing a black car with California plates.
Yes. And same thing as the boys, what caught his attention was that the car was driving creepily slow.
It's also unnerving because the vehicle is driving past an elementary school going really slow. And then that same car is seen in a neighborhood where a young child goes missing. So was this vehicle and the person in it looking to take a child?
Well, that's the thing, is that Sam Hall said that he noticed the driver was watching the children.
Ew.
And the good thing is that he was watching the driver. So he noticed that it was a male driving. He had long hair and a beard.
Whoa. This is amazing. I love this point in the case because, one, it confirms it was a black vehicle. Two, the person driving, this is the first time that we even think of a male driving. So far, it's been a female.
Mm-hmm.
And then thirdly, he says the person and the male driving has long hair.
Exactly.
Which, if we think back to the 3-year-old's account where he says Vicki was knocked down by a vehicle and a person, the 3-year-old said a woman with long hair, picked her up, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, the 3-year-old could have just assumed in their 3-year-old mind that the person with the long hair was a female, when actuality, it could have really just been a male.
Exactly.
So this is a very valuable piece of information.
Well, it gets even more valuable, Bev.
I know it does, Becky.
Because when the coach looks this man in the eye as he's driving by, he gets chills. His hair on the back of his neck stands straight up and he gets the creepiest feeling. So he watches this man to make sure that nothing is going awry. But as he drives away, Coach Hall has the wherewithal to write down the California license plate.
Which, oh my God, so amazing that he did that.
Yeah.
I love that he got that feeling because if he had not,
we would still be at square one.
Yeah, this mystery might never have been solved, actually, in fact.
Well, exactly, right? So thank God he did that. And obviously he gives it to detectives because he thinks, oh, I have now heard of this girl that's gone missing. There's rumors of this black car. Maybe this is valuable.
Thank God he spoke up.
Exactly, because he didn't have to. Now, the weird thing is, when he saw this man in the car, it was only 20 minutes before Vicki was last seen.
Oh my gosh.
So it really does make you think, if this man is the one who took Vicki, that, as you said, he was on the prowl.
He was, yeah.
So detectives obviously submit the license plate. And because this is back in the 80s, it's out-of-state license plate. They have to actually send it off and wait for a response back. So it takes a little bit longer than maybe nowadays. While waiting, they actually go to Vicki's home and they start collecting samples of Vicki's hair, her clothing, and some other items just so that they have that to compare anything to. And it was at this moment that Debbie and her family realized that they might need to prepare themselves for the fact that Vicki may never be coming home.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it hit them really hard because up until that point, they kind of had hope that, oh, maybe she's lost. Maybe she got hurt.
And
she'll
I know
be coming home.
The mom specifically had said in a documentary that she had hoped and was clinging on to the fact that maybe Vicki was taken by a woman because she wanted a daughter of her own, maybe had lost a child, because that gave her hope that Vicki would still be alive.
Mm-hmm.
But with this new information, it kind of dwindles that hope even more.
You're exactly right, Bev. So eventually the license plate does come back and they're able to identify this man. He is 28-year-old Los Angeles man named Frank Atwood Jr. When they look into his record, they learn that he was actually out on parole. He had a prior conviction for child molestation and kidnapping.
Mic drop moment.
That's right. Now, detectives obviously know they need to go to his last known address, so they go to LA. It turns out it was his parents' house. His parents admitted that their son had committed crimes in the past, but according to them, he was kind of on a better path, being on parole, and that he was at their house 3 days prior. But they didn't know currently where he was. Investigators tell them that their son may be involved in Vicki's disappearance, and that they're fighting against the clock, so if they know anything, they have to tell them. But they don't, so detectives give them their card and say, if you hear anything or speak to Frank,
let us know.
Call us, please. When the detectives leave, they felt a little disheartened because Frank's mom seemed really distant from them and kind of cold towards the situation, almost defensive.
Well, it's their son that they're accusing of being involved in a potential kidnapping. And I would think that as a mother, when your son goes to prison for like abduction and molestation, I mean, for him to kind of be accused of something in a similar vein again, I would be defensive as well. And not only that, I can see why the detectives are feeling this way, because obviously the parents have hope that their son is on a better path. You know, he's on parole. So they're like, this cannot be him. You know, so
you got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Right?
So obviously they're not going to give up something willingly or easily because of that hope.
Yeah. And they want to protect their son too, right?
Yeah.
With that being said, the investigators actually get an opposite vibe from Frank's father. They got the impression that he was very understanding that, yes, this girl is in danger. I will do anything to help.
Right.
So imagine leaving that house being like,
that was weird.
oh, okay. Like, I don't know what is going to come from this, basically.
Well, we know how our mom is with our baby brother. She's very protective and is like, Axel can do no wrong. Right? Maybe that's kind of the mom's vibe. Like, my baby boy, you know, a mother and son's relationship. Maybe the father is more like, holy shit.
Did you do something bad?
He's not like seeing things through rose-colored tinted glasses.
Yeah, maybe, right? Well, fortunately for investigators, Frank Jr. calls his parents just a few hours later, Bev.
Ooh.
And he actually calls and tells his mother that him and a friend are stranded in Texas because his car broke down and he needs money wired to him for repairs. His mother writes down the address of where the shop is and tells him not to worry, son. And then the phone call ends, and I assume she's heading out to set up that wire transfer. Once his wife leaves, Frank Sr. writes down the address, leaves himself, goes to a payphone, calls the FBI agents.
Wow, it's like he knew his wife wasn't going to, you know? Like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna do this for my son, no big deal. And he's like, girl, don't be naive.
Exactly. So Frank Sr. gives them the address of the shop that Frank Jr. is at in Kerrville, Texas. And while Frank Jr. is waiting for the wire transfer, agents actually make a call to the officers in Texas because they want him apprehended. And so what they do is they actually call the shop and speak to the manager to make sure that Frank and his friend are still there. And when they confirm that, they actually go to the shop and they arrest Frank and his friend James McDonald. Now, Bev, this was only 4 days after Vicki went missing. And unfortunately, when the two men were arrested, Vicki was still nowhere to be found. And there was no visible signs that she was even in the car. Now that these two men are arrested, they are taken down to headquarters and interrogated. Frank tells investigators that him and James had actually been in Tucson. And on September 17th, it just so happened that Frank was in Vicki's neighborhood. He told investigators that himself and James had been staying in a nearby park. But around 3 p.m. on the 17th, they had gotten in an argument and Frank went to buy drugs. He returned to the park about 2 hours later, around 5 p.m. However, he refused to give any other accounts of his whereabouts within those 2 hours. But he was very adamant that he was not responsible for Vicki's disappearance. Then the investigators go speak with James. They need to corroborate Frank's weird-ass story.
Yeah.
James tells them that him and Frank got in an argument and that Frank left him at the park around 3 p.m. When he returned 2 hours later, Frank was covered in blood. It was all over his hands and clothes.
Which is a tidbit of information that Frank initially has left out in his account.
Exactly.
Because it's sketchy as hell.
Yes. And Frank's explanation to James about all the blood was that he actually got in a fight with his drug dealer. A pretty bad fight, it sounds like, if it was.
You had to have blood everywhere.
Yeah, like, did you kill him?
And why were you fighting your drug dealer?
Right? James also gave detectives a few names of other transients in the area that they had hung out with while in Tucson. After hearing everything that James McDonald had to say, investigators applied for a search warrant for Frank's car. While that was being processed, they went to find and hopefully speak with some of the people James had named from the park. Within their search, they actually met up with 2 of the men that James had named from the park. They told investigators that Frank had spent a few nights in their trailer while in Tucson. One of the men, who went by Mad Dog, told detectives that he recalled Frank being at the trailer the night of September 17th and had noticed Frank Atwood with blood all over his clothes. He told them that they even had a discussion about how Frank should get rid of his bloody clothes that evening. Because of this, detectives got a warrant to search the trailer. During their search, they found a bloody towel and a brush believed to belong to Frank. All of this was tested, but unfortunately were deemed to be irrelevant to the case, although creepy.
Yeah.
Detectives continued to canvass the park, and they ended up speaking with a couple who had actually seen Frank between 3 and 5 p.m. that day. They told them he was covered in blood. They were concerned and asked him what had happened and if he was all right. They got the same story as James. He had a fight with a drug dealer. Now, hearing this information, they search the park to see if they can find any bloody clothes, a weapon, anything that will relate to this case. But they find absolutely nothing, Bev. And this is just following suit with the rest of the case. There's no evidence, just
a lot
stories.
Of testimony.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So they're super frustrated, but they get the warrant for Frank's car. And sadly, they are not able to find anything in it. There is nothing that belongs to Vicki. There is no DNA. There is no hair, no clothing fibers. Absolutely nothing. But what they do end up finding is a small pink paint scuff on Frank's front bumper. When examined, it was an exact match to the paint from Vicki's bicycle. At that point, everyone knew that 3-year-old little boy saw Vicki's abduction that day.
Absolutely.
When they look over Vicki's bike, they notice a small little chrome plating scuff.
A transfer scuff, if you
will. A transfer scuff from Frank's bumper. And they were able to 100% match it through testing.
Wow. That is a stroke of luck, which is abnormal for this case so far.
Yeah, exactly, right?
It's crazy how they link him through that scuff. Like, that is like one of the craziest things. Like, the way he took Vicki down in that straight is his undoing, because her favorite bike
gave them the answers. You know what? It was also said, because there was no blood at that crime scene, he was going so slow that there almost shouldn't have even been any scuffs. But by a stroke of luck, there was. Like, he was maybe only going 5 or 10 kilometers an hour, just enough to nudge her off her bike.
And it just so happens.
Just got just enough to prove that it was him. Now, only 3 weeks after Vicki had gone missing, Frank Atwood Jr. was arrested for kidnapping Vicki. Although they suspected that Vicki was dead by that point, they just had no evidence to support that.
Right. I mean, they have the testimony from 2 separate people that there was blood all over him, or three separate people, that there was blood all over him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sketchy enough that he's not willing to say to the cops
where he was
for those 2 hours, but yet can tell everyone else it was a drug deal. Like, if it was in fact a drug deal, Frank, then why wouldn't you just tell the police that?
Exactly.
So there's obviously more to that than he's willing to admit to anyone.
Yeah.
I.e., he's killed a young girl.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bev, when the Tucson community found out through the media that years before Frank Atwood had molested a 7-year-old boy, but had taken a plea bargain for the single charge of kidnapping instead of molestation, they were outraged because this meant that Frank would only get a sentence of 5 years. And then on top of that, he was paroled after 3.
Right, so he was out in the community in such a short time. And if he had actually been charged with molestation, he would have been in prison for a lot longer. Therefore, the abduction and what we're assuming in this podcast, murder of Vicki, would not have happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the community showed Vicki's family support by protesting. They wore yellow ribbons in support of the family. And at that time, Frank was facing extradition back to Arizona. Although he was trying to fight it, he did not want to. But despite his efforts, he was brought back, and in November of 1984, the trial for Vicki's kidnapping began. Unfortunately, this was not a speedy trial as the family had hoped for. First, it was petitioned to be moved to Phoenix because of the extensive media coverage. That was declined. And then the jury selection took forever. But this ended up being a good thing because just as the court case was moving forward, it got halted one more time. And this was because there had been a child-sized human skull found in the desert just northwest of Tucson, Arizona. By a stroke of luck, a woman had just been out walking her dog when she stumbled upon this skull. She called the police, and then the FBI came in to search. They ended up finding almost a whole child-sized human skeleton. However, it had been a very long and tedious search because the bones were strewn about everywhere. Because the skeleton or body had been out there in the desert for so long.
Yeah.
Animals over time had just spread it out.
Yeah, and carried them, like the bones.
Exactly.
Ooh.
Now, the investigators scoured the area and had found a total of 20 bags of evidence. One really important piece being the lower mandible or the jaw, and it still had teeth attached. When the remains were examined, it was determined that the bones had suffered what looked to be about 8 months of wear and tear from the desert heat and other conditions. So because of this, there was no soft tissue, and they weren't able to determine how this victim had died.
Right, but at the very least, they have the teeth of whoever this skull belongs to.
Exactly. And fortunately, when those teeth come back, they match Vicki.
Also, don't you think it's kind of wild that murders that happened so long ago prior to like DNA, even though there probably wouldn't have been any in this specific case, were often like human remains were often identified by teeth. And that's why we saw like after murderers found out that like teeth were used, they would like get rid of them or they would like burn them, right? So that
try and
there
cover
was
it
no
up.
evidence of the teeth for the person to be identified until DNA came along. It's just crazy that our teeth are like so unique. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. And thank God they are because
it solved this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that Vicki's body has been found, her family can lay her to rest with a proper burial.
And to top it all off, because Frank is currently about to be on trial for a kidnapping, he can now actually be charged with murder instead, which is what he deserves. So it's like a complete stroke of luck that the jury selection took as long as it did.
Oh, exactly, right? Because now they can just move forward with the murder case instead of being like trying him for kidnapping.
Having him only serve 3 years or 6 or what have you.
Exactly. Then maybe getting out.
Yeah, this man who has a pattern of abuse towards minors will be off the streets for good compared to just like a short temporary time.
Exactly. You are so right, Bev. That is a very good point. And on March 26, 1987, Frank Atwood was indicted for the first-degree murder charge of Vicki Hoskinson, and he was found guilty and was sentenced to death.
And he was actually just recently executed about a year ago, hey?
Yeah, like a year and a half. It was on June 8th, 2022 that he was executed. And Vicki's whole family was in attendance. So they kind of got official closure. They saw it to like the bitter end.
Right.
And he is no more.
Yeah, he's off this earth.
Exactly. He spent 37 years in jail.
Before his execution.
Exactly.
Which I think is almost justice being served. I mean, I do think he deserved to spend time in prison with his rights completely taken away and feeling the full force of that before he was actually executed. That's just my opinion, though.
Bev's happy he got to suffer.
Yeah, I just think like if you take away someone's opportunity in life or to have a life, you deserve to feel the effect of your opportunity and your freedom to be taken as well.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. You did something terrible. You should suffer that consequence.
Absolutely.
And to bring this back to Vicki's family, because they're the true victims in all of this, how this case ended up playing out actually had some benefits. One is the family was able to get closure and find her body, and that allowed them to actually have a funeral for her and celebrate her life. They had so many friends, family come out to support her, and that was just utterly beautiful for them. On top of that, Debbie Carlson made sure that her daughter's death had not gone in vain. She had become a huge activist in the political realm and used that to have several laws passed that ultimately would protect children. She believed that through all the sadness and anger, this was her saving grace, and it would continue for the next 37 years until Frank was executed.
That's beautiful. That's a really positive outlook to have.
It is.
And for them to have been at the execution, it really all just comes full circle. And I'm very happy that despite the tragedy in the family, that this is how it all played out.
Absolutely, because they could have not ever found out what happened to their daughter, and that would have been the worst thing in the world. Well, this is the case of Vicki Hoskinson, and that's all I have for you today, Bev. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sharing.